This episode of Around the Oval is brought to you by Todd Pennington with Renovation Mortgage.
Hey, Ohio State fans, Alex Gleitman here, back with another edition of Around the Oval, brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. It is Big Ten tournament week for the men's hoops team, and that means that we are going to be breaking down the Buckeyes, who will be in action for the first time in the tournament as the 5 seed on Thursday. Time is TBD. They will be the second game on Thursday, March 11th, approximately 25 minutes after the first game ends. So figure sometime around 1:55, 2 o'clock Eastern time for the Buckeyes to tip off against the winner of Northwestern Minnesota. And to kind of break down the season that was and the season that's still ahead for Ohio State, we bring in our very own intern who's live from Columbus and the campus of Ohio State, Matt Goldman. Matt, thanks for joining the show today.
Thanks for having me, Alex. Excited to talk Buckeye basketball.
Of course, man. And, I think before we dive into the Big Ten tournament, we have to look at Ohio State's season as a whole. And, I think they spent most of the year as a top 10 team, some of it as a top 5 team. Certainly exceeded my expectations coming into the season. I personally had concerns that this team didn't really have like a go-to guy, an NBA type of player like a Keita Bates-Diop or, guys like that they've had in the past. And, it seems like for a while they were on a roll. They were kind of spreading the love. One night it was Dwayne Washington. One night it was EJ Liddell. Sometimes it was Justin Ahrens stepping up and kind of leading the team, which I think is going to serve this team well when it comes to March Madness, having a balanced roster and guys who can step up when one guy's not having a great game. Another one is, and that could be valuable. But at the same time, I think you saw down the stretch when they lost 4 straight, they were kind of missing that consistent presence. And as teams started to figure them out and do some things to kind of stifle a guy like Ahrens from behind the 3-point line or frustrate EJ Liddell inside and get a little physical with him, I think you saw that the need for a go-to guy is certainly there. So all that said, I mean, looking back on this year, how do you kind of summarize Ohio State's season in your eyes?
Yeah, you kind of talked about in the beginning, like I didn't expect this team to come in and consistently be a top 10, top 5 team. I expected them to be in a competitive Big Ten with a lot of great competitors with Luka Garza and some other top players in this country, and just a balanced Michigan team, a balanced Wisconsin team. There's a lot of great competition they're going to face. So I came in expecting that this team was going to finish around 11-9 in the conference, and they kind of did that. They finished 12-8, so they did pretty much what I expected. Yeah, that 4-game losing streak at the end of the season was not what I expected. I expected at least 1 out of the 4 wins, just because of the fact that if they are a top 10 team, they should be beating those teams. They should be close. Yes, they were close to Michigan. Yes, they were close to Michigan State, but I expected 1 win. Anyways, with what you were saying about a balanced lineup, I really thought that was Ohio State's strength this year, that they were able to have different go-to guys every game, and that they had 3 players average double figures during the games of either Justice Suin, who's averaging 10.5, or Dwayne, who's averaging 15, or EJ 16.5. So I think having those guys out there to step up, and sometimes Justin Ahrens was that guy who was able to make 12 to 15 points per game just based off of 3-pointers, was pretty special for Ohio State. And the fact that they were able to still end up being a top 10 team at the end of the season, at the end of the regular season, in such a hard conference this year was pretty impressive, on just the fact that the coaching staff was able to get them ready in such an interesting off season, and they were still able to put together a nice product.
Yeah, I agree for sure. I before the season, I think if you told me they would have went 12-8 in conference, I would have said solid year for this team. I maybe expect them to go 10-10, 11-9. I thought they were kind of a middle of the pack type of team. They ended up being a top 5 team in the conference, a top third of the conference team, and they could have finished better, to your point. I mean, the Michigan State game, the Illinois game slipped away from them. If they go 2-2 in those last 4 games, you're looking at 14-6, and that's a really, really good year, in addition to them going undefeated outside the conference with a couple of really nice wins. So, let's talk about that 4-game losing streak. To me, I think there's a little bit of an overreaction. I mean, Michigan, there's no shame in losing that game. At Michigan State, so it's on the road. I know there's no fans, but it's still going, having to travel, playing in another team's arena against a team that's actually, kind of hitting their stride a little bit. They beat Illinois, they then beat Ohio State, and now they just beat Michigan to end the season. So maybe Michigan State, not as bad of a loss as maybe you thought during that game, although that was certainly a winnable one. Iowa, a tough one. I think, it's always tough to beat a team. We were just talking about this before the broadcast. Always tough to beat a team multiple times in a season. And Iowa, Ohio State already beat them in their place earlier in the year. I think while you wouldn't have wanted to lose that game by 16 points, I think you see it as an acceptable loss. And then Illinois was a top 5 team, number 4 in the country. A game I think they should have won, leading 68-64 with, about 2 minutes left, and, ended up losing that game with Illinois going on a 9-0 run there. So I guess my question to you is, do you see this 4-game losing streak being a concern in general for the outlook of the team, and how they finish the year in the postseason? Do you see it as a big concern entering the Big Ten tournament, or is it, hey, these guys maybe were playing over their heads a little bit for 7 games. They had a tough 4-game stretch to end the year. And while you would have loved to have seen them win 1 or 2, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I don't think there's an overreaction. They just played some of the top teams in the country, in my opinion. I think also the fact that there's some great coaches they just faced that are able to figure out what the Buckeyes were doing all season. They were able to challenge a lot of teams with their shooting, with the way they were playing on their offense, maybe not their defense, they were challenging teams, but their offense. And I think a lot of teams were able to find their weaknesses, and that's how they were able to capitalize in those games. Yeah, Iowa was one of the best shooting teams in the country. I think they just outshot Ohio State, and that's pretty much why they lost that game. But the Michigan game was heavily contested. They have some great players. They have a very good defense. So I think that was the mark there in that game. Then Michigan State, I think, was very close. I think it could have gone either way. I think it was just who's playing better. And you kind of said it. Michigan State's playing some of their best basketball right now. I think they're still a legit team. They're going to end up playing March Madness this season. And they just beat some of the best teams in the country, Illinois and Michigan as well. So I think people were thinking maybe that at the time the Michigan State loss was not looking that great just based off of what they've done in the Big Ten this year. But to end the season, that loss doesn't look as bad. And that's why the AP voters still have Ohio State in the top 10 at the moment, because one, they believe they're a good team. They're pretty legit just based off of their offense and the capabilities they have. And 2, they haven't lost to any bad teams really this year. And especially that 4-game losing streak, they weren't losing to any really bad teams. And I think with that Illinois game, that 9-0 run was obviously not what Ohio State fans were looking for. And I think that's what did not help the game at all. But I think also the fouling was an issue. I mean, I won't go into too much detail of that game. It was 24-14 on fouls. So Ohio State got a little excessive on that. But I don't really see it as that big of an overreaction just because of the fact that the Big Ten is so strong this year. And the last 4 games they've played were maybe that could have been the hardest end of the season schedule they've had in a long time. Playing 3 top 10 teams was very impressive.
Yeah. And, I think if you're Chris Holtmann, you kind of got to tell the guys, look, what happened. We had a great year, not the end that we wanted, but now it's on to the Big Ten tournament. It's a brand new season. You win this outright, you have a shot at, I guess, a number 2 seed, probably at best at this point right now. You could be Big Ten tournament champions, which would be a huge accomplishment for this team. They haven't done that since Thad Matta was the coach. That would be quite an accomplishment and set themselves up nicely for an NCAA tournament run. Speaking of, the Big Ten tournament, I think the worst thing about that 4-game losing streak is it did prevent Ohio State from getting one of the top 4 seeds and getting a double bye. And so on Thursday, they're going to have to face the winner of Northwestern Minnesota. And while that's a 12-13 game, I mean, 3 of Ohio State's 8 losses are to Northwestern and Minnesota. 2 of them were to Northwestern and Minnesota. They lost once to Minnesota, the only time they played them this year. And then they lost once to Northwestern, splitting that series. And then if they win that game, they will play Purdue, and that's where the other 2 losses. So 4 of the 8 losses, they've lost twice to Purdue. They've lost once to Minnesota, once to Northwestern. And those are 3 of the teams that they could face in the first 2 rounds of the Big Ten. So when you look at that game, I mean, the losses to Northwestern and Minnesota were a little bit earlier in the year. I don't think Ohio State fully had their identity, and, Purdue might just be a matchup thing. I mean, what's your outlook on the draw that Ohio State got? I mean, I don't love the fact that they didn't get the double bye, but on paper, they should be able to beat the winner of Northwestern Minnesota. And then, Purdue's going to be tough, but as we talked about before the broadcast, beating a team 3 times in one season is not easy, let alone twice. So are you feeling confident heading into the Big Ten tournament with the draw they got, or are you a little bit nervous about this?
I'm a little nervous. I'm not nervous for the opening round potential, the opening game that Ohio State has to face, because I think Minnesota's kind of fell off the face of the earth ever since the Ohio State game. Really, they just haven't had the best of the season. Also with Northwestern as well, they went on a 10-game losing streak at one point, so not their greatest. Yes, they had a very hard schedule, and it wasn't that easy, especially with a team that doesn't have that much talent. But I'm not too nervous about that game, just because I think Ohio State can exploit the matchups within those two teams. I think Ohio State now knows what to do, especially with the fact that EJ's playing his best ball of the year. Dwayne's lighting it up when he needs to. And I think also Kyle Young's playing fairly well, especially with CJ Walker back as well. So I think that 4 of the 5 starters, I'm pretty confident with their capabilities. I don't know where to think of Justice at the moment. So I think going back to the matchup, the first opening matchup, I'm not that nervous, but I think when it comes to this Purdue game, that's going to be where Ohio State fans should be a little nervous. I think you mentioned it, the matchups. That's going to be a thing that Ohio State needs to make sure, especially with Travion Williams, their big center, who averages a double-double for Purdue, who I actually was on the call for the Ohio State game for the student radio at Ohio State, my first collegiate game. And I was like, maybe they'll have a game winner. Like, who knows? And freshman Jaden Ivey comes in, gets a game winner. And just watching that game, you could just tell that Ohio State was up in the beginning of the game, and they were pretty dominant. But there was just something that was going on with the fact that Ohio State wasn't able to guard the paint that well and not be able to rebound. And Ohio State's 157th in the country of rebounds per game. And I think that's been showing lately. I think it could show against Purdue, which is the reason why I'm not too confident with this Purdue matchup, because Purdue's very balanced as well. I think with the fact that they have Stefanovic, who's one of the top 3-point shooters in the conference, and they also have Travion Williams down low. This is a very physical team, and that's where Ohio State's been exploited this year, especially within the paint. So that could be interesting, the fact that Ohio State might have gone like not the best matchup. And I think the difference in getting the 4 or 5 seed was those 2 Purdue games at the end of the day. So that really was a killer for them. And I don't know where to look at this. I think it's going to be a coin toss at this point for me with the Purdue game.
So I'm going to put you on the hot seat. Make your prediction for the Big Ten tournament. How far does Ohio State get? Because let's just I know you know, but for everyone listening, so they'll play the winner of Northwestern Minnesota. If they win that game, they would play Purdue. If they win that game in the semis, they would play likely Michigan, but it will be either Michigan, Maryland, or Michigan State. I personally have a hard time seeing Michigan not advancing to the semis. So very likely they would play Michigan, and then if they were able to win that game, they potentially would go to the finals, and it could be anyone from a pool of Nebraska, Penn State, Indiana, Rutgers, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Iowa. I would say probably most likely one of Illinois or Iowa will probably get there. I guess I could see Wisconsin kind of getting hot maybe and making a little bit of a run. So with all that said and laid out, what's your prediction for Ohio State in the Big Ten tournament?
I think that Purdue game will end up going Ohio State's way. I just believe that the fact that you can't beat a team 3 times in a row is just my philosophy. That's always been that way, especially just how life works. And I also think the fact that Ohio State is now fully furnished, I think that their team is ready against this Purdue team. I think they know their weaknesses. I think they know where to cover. And I think the fact that if they are able to be aggressive down low in the paint, stop Travion Williams from getting his shots up, getting his offensive rebounds, I think that can be the key for Ohio State. I believe that they have the capability. Seth Towns is playing some great ball right now. He's pretty physical down low times. Kyle Young's playing great, and especially with Justice and EJ as well. I think this could go Ohio State's way. If they were to, I believe they will advance. I just don't see how they can beat Michigan. I really don't see how any team in the country at the moment can beat Michigan. I know Ohio State fans might not be too happy hearing that from me, but I really don't think this Michigan team can be stopped by anyone at the moment. I know they lost to Illinois. I know they've had their interesting losses, but this Michigan team is so talented. Yes, it'll be close again. I just don't think Ohio State can get past them this time. And even if they were to get past them, I don't really see how they could end up winning the conference championship. Just the fact that they're still Iowa and they're still Illinois, and there's potentially a Wisconsin team waiting for them. So there's some hard competition. I think Ohio State's best chances are reaching that Michigan game. I like to think that they'd be fairly close in beating Michigan, but they won't end up winning.
Yeah, I have them going to the semis as well and losing to Michigan. Probably being I'll call it a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. That's just my guess right now, but I guess it depends what happens across the country. I mean, if they get a couple wins and and maybe play Michigan close. You know, who knows? The committee might throw them in the back end of the 2 seeds, but I think they're going to be a 3. I will say for Michigan, I do think they're very good. I think their guard play is a big question mark I have. And in the NCAA tournament, you need great guard play. And I don't know if they have great guard play. I will, depending on the draw, will probably likely have them going to the Final Four. But for me, Gonzaga is the team to beat. I just think they are the best team. Veterans, young guys, size, perimeter play. They had a scare against BYU this week in the West Coast Conference tournament, but they got past that. I just think they're the best team, most talented team. I think Mark Few is a really good coach. He hasn't gotten over that hump yet. I think, Juwan Howard has done an impressive job, but I think that a good coach with the right roster like Gonzaga has, I think that could give Michigan a lot of problems. So we'll see. I slightly disagree with you. I still have them as a Final Four team, but I think Gonzaga is going to be my pick to win it all finally this year, similar to the way Virginia finally got over the hump a couple years back. And so last thing that leads us into is the NCAA tournament. Want to just, it's hard to say without knowing the draw and things like that and predicting upsets and all that. But just off the cuff right now, as we stand here, we're recording this on March 10th ahead of the Big Ten tournament. What is your prediction for the seed that Ohio State will get in the tournament, and what round do you think that they'll get to this March?
I believe that Ohio State's going to end up being the last 2 seed based off of what's going to happen this weekend. Just the fact that I think the committee views Ohio State still one of the strongest teams at the moment. They put them as a 1 seed when it came out with the top 16 rankings a few weeks ago. I believe that Ohio State, depending on where the dominoes fall, I think if Iowa were to get knocked out immediately, I think that could be a really strong case to put Ohio State above Iowa within that last 2 seed. I think that could really help out. Illinois is going to end up as potentially one of those 1 seeds or as a high 2 seed. I think the committee is going to view that as, okay, Ohio State beat Illinois once. Illinois beat Ohio State closely once. Ohio State beat them in nice fashion the first time. So that the fact that they can get a 2 seed, I think is appropriate, maybe a 3 seed. But if they were to end up getting a 2 seed and being the region with Gonzaga, yeah, that's going to be pretty tough. And I don't think they're going to get out of that region winning it. I believe Gonzaga is also one of the top 4 best teams in the country at the moment. I think Ohio State's going to end up being an Elite 8 team this year. I think that's their farthest they can go, just based on the fact that they have so much depth and they're pretty versatile within the fact that they're a pretty balanced team. I also learned this fun fact a few days ago that the past 20 national champions, 16 of the national championships had 5 players that averaged 8 points or more. Ohio State, 5 players that averaged 8 points or more in the season. So I find that pretty interesting, the fact that they're pretty balanced within their starting 5, with CJ, who's averaging 8, Kyle averaging 9, then Justice 10, Dwayne 15, EJ 16. So I find that pretty interesting, the fact that this team is very loaded. And then you bring off Justin Arns off the bench. You bring off Musa Jal with his athleticism. You bring off some other players. Michi Johnson comes in for a little. I think there's a lot of guys on there that mesh well. That could be interesting to see, the fact that we faced some of the best competition in the country this year. So now we're ready to play some other teams that might have not been as competitive as the Big Ten. So I believe Ohio State getting to the Elite Eight is their max. I don't really see a Final Four for this Ohio State team this year.
Yeah, I'm not as high on this team. I think, again, without a go-to guy, and CJ's done a fine job, but without an elite point guard, especially, losing Jimmy Soto. So I think it's a little, Michi Johnson's like either Dwayne Washington or Michi Johnson, who should be still in high school, are kind of your point guard when CJ's not in. And, CJ's a really nice player, but he's not someone who's like creating a ton when it comes to the offense and opportunities. I think he does a really nice job, again, kind of steering the ship. But I think without those 2 pieces and maybe lacking some size and physicality inside, as we've seen with some of the bigger teams that they played, I think it's Sweet 16 is the ceiling. I think that if they could get to the Sweet 16, I think that would be a great step in the right direction for this program. Because a guy you didn't mention, but I know you talked about earlier, Seth Towns, he's not fully healthy. Next year, the hope is that he's fully healthy and could go next year. That's a huge piece to add to this team, in addition to the guys coming in, Malachi Branham, Kalen Esker, and obviously having Michi Johnson now as a guy who be where he should be with a little bit more experience and a little bit more development. It was a great move getting him in. You probably get Jimmy Soto's back with the extra year, and or you had him anyway with 2 years. And there's just some really nice pieces, EJ coming back and things along those lines, where I think making the Sweet 16, something they haven't done under Chris Holtmann yet, would be a great stepping stone to a potential Final Four run next year. Again, I think they need EJ to continue to develop. Maybe Malachi Branham is everything he's cracked up to be, a top 25 player who could come in and provide offense. Dwayne Washington will obviously be back and better. And, it's pretty much everyone other than CJ and Kyle that will be back. And if you could get Seth Towns healthy and playing where he's capable of added to that group, I think next year is the year I'm looking at where, okay, this is the year for Ohio State to make a run. But this year, depending on the draw, I'm either saying round of 32, heartbreaking loss, or Sweet 16. And I just saw this team all along as like a top 15 team, not really a top 5 or top 10 team. I just think they're missing a couple of those elements, but I hope I'm wrong. I hope that they make a run. Maybe there's a couple upsets. Maybe they get a really good draw and they make some things happen, get hot at the right time. You never know. So we shall see. But Matt, thanks for joining the show. It was great to preview the Big Ten tournament and a little bit of the NCAA tournament. We'll keep our fingers crossed that Ohio State gives us something to talk about through the end of the weekend. And then it's obviously on to March.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Really appreciate it. And looking forward to the Big Ten tournament starting today and seeing who Ohio State's going to face tomorrow.
This episode of Around the Oval was brought to you by Todd Pennington with Renovation Mortgage. If you've been thinking about refinancing or buying a house, check out our sponsor, Todd Pennington with Renovation Mortgage. They offer low rates for refinancing and home purchase loans, including first-time home buyer programs, down payment assistance, and cash-out home equity loans. Check out revolutionmortgage.com/tpennington.